I made about an hour-and-a-half video on Timewave Zero and integral theory and how they could maybe be interconnected. But I think watching it is sort of laborious, and I don't think people will get that much more out of it than if I make a 15-minute video trying to go with the flow of this. You know, the diagrams can be helpful in certain ways, but they can also, I think, act as a degree of confusion. I would suggest that if you are not familiar with the basics of Timewave Zero, this won't make any sense. And if you're not familiar with the basics of Ken Wilber's integral model, this probably won't make that much sense either, though I will try to make a very brief explanation of it in this video. I fleshed it out far more in my bigger video, but again, it muddles things, so I'm not going to take too much time on it. So I'm playing with the theories, so notice that they're not exactly the same as either of the expressions of either of those, though I do feel like I have a pretty good grasp. I'm not an expert per se on them, but a pretty good grasp of them, and I played with many other models too. So integral theory has both a developmental element to it and a quadrant system, quadrant being perspectives of consciousness, and I've found a way, I feel, and I'm going to express how I think that works, to integrate the developmental stages with the perspective quadrants, the major perspectives, how I think that they do interconnect. To make this most simply, I would go with the developmental chakras, so that, in rough we have, and I'm going to frame this using particular language, sort of a survival system at the root, and then sort of an emotional bonding at the navel center roughly, and then at power orientation, or ability to witness as object outside oneself, solar plexus, the place of sort of care and compassion and communion at the heart, the place of creativity and archetypal expression at the throat, and the place of vision and intensity and multiplicity in a certain way at the brow. And then although there's often a seventh center, I'm going to kind of say that that's maybe, in a certain way, that one. Maybe. So, maybe not, but I'm playing with a 6-on-6 model here that in certain regards is fleshed out something like spiral dynamics. So this is fractal. So that at the root there was sort of 6 stages. At the navel there's 6 stages. At the solar plexus 6, heart 6, throat 6, brow 6. And what happens arguably in evolution is that they're repeating, so that up into about reptiles there was 6 stages sort of, and they are mimicking what sort of happens at the navel center, but the primary focus is different, so that at the root, although it goes through these 6, its primary focus is on survival, sort of fight or flight. So how Darwin framed it is all of evolution squashed to this one, where I'm trying to give it far more broad spectrum here, but show how they repeat. So, if it's at the root of survival, it still has these other centers operational. And then the second one is primary focus is kind of bonding or emotionality. But it has sort of power, it has sort of communion, it has sort of creativity, it has sort of vision, but its primary focus is that. And then same with the solar plexus, same with the heart, etc. what I'm going to argue is that the first three take us up to about humans. Humans' primary focus, in my opinion, is about power. It's about self in relation to other, so that we can be tool makers, we can create, we can objectify. Whereas mammals were primarily focused in the we, their limbic system. We have a neocortex, which allows us to do that. They had the limbic system and I forget the name of the brain that's associated with that, but they can care for other. And then the reptiles were primarily for themselves, so survival. Before that in fish and whatnot, the early fish especially, there's no real sense of care. It's all about survival. So, and with that, I do believe that the states of consciousness are hooked into it. The primary chakra seems to be gross waking state, so that up into reptiles there is no dreaming. They're locked into this gross world, where with mammals they have access to the limbic system and the emotional care that stems from that, and so that they have access to dreaming. They can reflect on the past, where reptiles are also in the now. And so with that, there's this care. You can care about others, but they can't really make anything an object. Humans, we can make things an object. We can objectify it, and then in so doing, we can create tools. It starts with objectifying ourselves. Then we can objectify rituals, and then after that we can objectify systems to make tools. Sophisticated ones like science, we use it as a paradigmatic science, and then we can systematize science to make systems theory or chaos theory, but for object or tool making itself. The fourth, in my opinion, is a move sort of back into a more we space, more communion element, and it's interobjective. It deals with the systems complexities that we have to face right now, global problems that are very systemic, has more of a communion mind kind of connectivity. And so in that way, it's moving from I to we to I to we, so it's shifting back and forth. There's other patterns going on, but and more precisely, it's actually I to we to it to its. And that's, in my opinion, the four quadrants. Wilber's theory, I, we, it, its. And then these two, although they're operational in all of these centers, we haven't really developed any sort of real maps for it. Even the fourth one is what I'm going to say is just coming online. So we are at the end of the third major system, represented as the solar plexus. And then the fourth is a monumental leap in meaning, which is, in spiral dynamics, the shift from first tier to second tier, or Abraham Maslow's deficiency needs to abundance. That is the transition from power to care and communion, or compassion proper. And with it, I think, I can derive from this the notion that there would be a fourth state of consciousness, which itself lays on that, and that would be a primary, well, that's not true. You'd actually have to develop through all of these other states to actually have access to that. And so there's going down deeper to actually get access to this fourth state, but it would create a different kind of mind, an intermind of sorts. So that, people like Ken Wilber talk about non-dualism. Maybe that is, in that sense, the fourth state. It did only seem, the first people that sort of talk about it aren't that long ago, maybe 500 years ago, maybe get the inkling of this more integral consciousness. And maybe that's just a transition to a more fleshed out sense of that, where, yeah, hard to say exactly what that looks like exactly. But how this connects to Terence McKenna's theory is pretty straightforward. Terence McKenna is connecting the notion of time and novelty. Again, there's much to be said about that, and whether or not it actually is exactly accurate, but I think in general there's a lot of truths in that we are moving towards exponential growth, and with it something like a singularity of some sort of the mind is imminent, and or soonish, whether or not it's this year or 10 years. And with that you get this sense that novelty is getting much greater in shorter periods of time, shorter and shorter, greater levels of novelty, until one point there is this absolute singularity. And what I think that what might mean is something like telepathy, intermind communication, the laying down of a new stage, and the shift up into this more heart-centered communion self. Soul, I think, has often been talked about down here, sort of the astral self, but this is something like, I think, what has been really pointed to, like the Christian soul, the true self-sacrificing self, which would give us really interesting knowledge potentially. But yeah, so there is this paradox that as you go up, you're going into higher complexity, further away from the source, but also with it we're fractaling back down. So that this is the thing. He talks about the archaic revival, and I think this fits in. It does fit in perfectly if this is right, because the movement is up to this, which is a higher, more complex system, but it's also down to the very beginning, because at the 6 you're starting back to the 1, same with spiral dynamics. Beige is the very lowest, or survivalistic. Second tier, yellow is back to the bottom, and there's a sense of artistic kind of thing, back, very introspective, very eye-oriented in a certain regard. And so even though you're going up, you also go back down at the same time. So that's the paradox of it. It's going both ways there. What else should I say about this? That does mostly summarize the gist of this. There's many other things I could say that kind of fall out of it, but that's the central points. Blessings.